Welcome everybody. We begin Rambam Hilchos Yesodei Hatorah Perek Vav. It's important to remember that the Rambam's system and organization is always par excellence. So before each halacha, the Rambam enumerates the mitzvahs that are going to be discussed in that halacha. In the beginning of Hilchos Yesodei Hatorah, he said we're going to be exploring 10 mitzvahs of the 613 mitzvahs. We still have a few to go. The first 4 chapters, he dealt with the mitzvah of Yedias Hashem, knowing that there is a God, not entertaining the thought that there is another God, knowing God's unity, love of Hashem, and awe of Hashem. In chapter 5, he discussed the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify Hashem, and the prohibition of desecrating Hashem's name. The 8th mitzvah, there's still 3 mitzvahs to go. The 8th mitzvah, he said, was Shaloi la'abed dvarim shenikra shmai aleim, not to destroy things upon which his name is conferred on them. This is the theme of chapter 6, Perek Vav, Perek Shishi, Aleph. Kol ha'ma'abed shem min hashemes hakdoshim hatahirim shenikra behem hakadosh baruch hu. Anyone who destroys a name of the holy, the sacred, and pure names with which Hashem is called and defined, loikim in HaTorah. This is an absolute prohibition in Torah, and therefore, under certain circumstances, the penalty can be lashes. What's the source? Because the Torah says about idolatry in Parshas Re'eh, you should destroy their name from that particular place where the idols are located. Do not do the same thing to Hashem your God. So this is a clear mitzvah loisaseh, that a person is not allowed to destroy any of the names of the holy and pure names by which Hashem is called. Beis v'shiva shemasheim. There are 7 names, says the Rambam, that go into this category, that one is biblically prohibited of destroying any of these names. Number 1, Hashem hanichtav Yud Kei Vav Kei v'hu Hashem hameforish hanichtav Aleph Daled Nun Yud. That is the name that is written out as a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, which is known as the Shem HaMeforish, the explicit name that, so to speak, defines Hashem. Or also if it's written as Aleph Daled Nun Yud, because they're both pronounced the same way. When we see in the written text Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, or we see Aleph Daled Nun Yud, in both cases we pronounce them as Aleph Daled Nun Yud. That is the first of the 7 names that the Rambam lists. Number 2, the name Kael, Aleph Lamed. Number 3, Eloika, Aleph Lamed Vav Hey. Number 4, Eloikim, Aleph Lamed Hey Yud Mem. Then you have Aleph Hey Yud Hey, Shem Eke, and then you have Shin Daled Yud, and then you have Tzva'is is the 7th. So again, we have Yud Kei Vav Kei, or Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Then we have Kael, Eloika, Eloikim, Eke, Shin Daled Yud, and the name Tzvayis. If somebody erases even one letter from these 7 names, there is a biblical prohibition against this, and therefore the penalty can be lashes. As I mentioned in other classes, we did not yet learn how penalties are given and under what circumstances. There are many, many conditions for somebody to actually get lashes. It was not very easy to get lashes. It was, in fact, extremely, extremely difficult. We will get there in Rambam much later when he discusses that. When he says about all of these negative prohibitions, you receive lashes, it's just a way of saying that this is an outright prohibition in Torah, and therefore, potentially it warrants a penalty of lashes, loikei lashes. What's the chiddush here? Not only if you erase the whole name, Yud and Hey and Vav, erase the whole thing. Even one letter. Once the name is written, the whole name is sacred and holy, and therefore even if I erase one letter, it is prohibited. Gimel. Now we discuss prefix and suffixes. All the letters that are adjacent to Hashem's name, preceding the name, you're allowed to erase it. Kagain, for example, Lamed mila Hashem, or Beis mi be'elokim, v'kayotze ben einen kedushas Hashem. Let's say you write the word La Hashem, to Hashem, or Be Elokim, in Hashem. That Lamed and that Beis don't possess the sanctity of the name. Therefore, you're allowed to erase it. But anything that's adjacent to Hashem's name, following the name, subsequent to the name, Kegoin, Langechav, Chav shel Eloikecha, or Chem shel Eloikeichem, v'kayotze behen, Eino nimchakois v'arein shkishar oisius shel Shem epnei sh'Hashem mekatshan. There's a difference between the prefix and the suffix. For example, when you write Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the name is Eloke. The name is, you have Hashem's name here, as the Rambam says, you have Eloka. But here you added Elokecha, your God. That's the suffix. Or, like we say in Krishma, Ani Hashem Elokechem, your God in the plural. What if I erase not Hashem's name, but I erase the suffix, I erase the Langechaf, or the Chaf Mem? Here the Rambam says, you're not allowed to erase it. Why? Because the name sanctified it. What does this mean? The prefix was written before I wrote Hashem's name, so it's not holy. The Lamed, La Hashem, is not holy. But the Elokecha, that Chaf was written after I wrote Hashem's name, Elokechem or Elokecha. So the sanctity of that name is now applied. It expands into the letter that serves as the suffix. That letter became also sacred. As we says, Hashem Mekadsha, the name was Mekadesh, also those letters that came following the name. First the name was written, and then this is written subservient to the name as a suffix. Elokecha, your God. We wrote God and then you. So therefore the you becomes an extension of Hashem's name because it was written afterwards as an extension, and therefore it's holy. So you're not allowed to erase it. And even though these suffixes became holy and you're not allowed to erase them, if you do, there is absolutely no penalty of lashes. However, there's makanois and makas mardus. Makanois and makas mardus means you give one rebellious, lashes for rebelliousness, which is basically the way of saying that this is a rabbinic prohibition, and therefore the court decides what is the best way and most appropriate way to penalize this person. It's not a biblical prohibition, or even some who say it is a biblical prohibition, but it's not something that deserves a biblical penalty. It would be like if somebody eats a chatzi shir. Let's say somebody eats a half of the volume of an olive, of something that's prohibited. So according to the halacha, it's awesome in Torah, but there's no penalty for it. So this is also a discussion, is it rabbinically prohibited or biblically prohibited, but there's still no penalty. Dalet. Kasav Aleph Lamed Me'elikim Yud He Me Yud Kei Vavkei Einei Nimchik. If somebody writes Aleph Lamed from the name Elikim, I want to write the name Elikim, but I start writing Aleph Lamed and I don't finish it. Whatever happens, I didn't have a chance to finish it. Or I want to write Yud and Hey and Vav and I already wrote Yud Hey. So what's the issue? The name was never written. So I can erase it because there's no holiness. And the Rambam says you're not allowed to erase it. Certainly if you're writing Yud K as a separate name, because it's one of Hashem's name, Yud K. Because the name Yud K is part of Hashem's name. So even if you're writing it as part of Yud K Vav K, even if you're writing it as part of Yud Kei Vav Kei, and you didn't finish writing the whole name, or as the Rambam says, you wrote Aleph Lamed from Elikim, and you didn't finish writing the whole name, but Aleph Lamed itself is a name, and Yud Kei itself is a name, and therefore, I cannot erase it. But if somebody writes a Shin and a Daled from the name Shin Daled Yud, I only write Shin Daled, I wanted to write the whole name, but I didn't have a chance to finish it, or I write Tzadik Beis from Tzvayis, then you are allowed to erase it. Why? Because Tzadik Dalet is not Hashem's name. Tzadik Vez is not Hashem's name. Shin Dalet is not Hashem's name. So this is not a holy name. I don't care if you erase it and you destroy it. In the other case, I wrote Aleph Lamed from Elikim, even though I wanted to write Elikim, but the Aleph Lamed itself possesses holiness because it's one of Hashem's 7 names. The same is true with Yud and Hey. Even though I wanted to write it as part of Yud Kei Vav Kei, but that itself is also a name of Hashem, and therefore the Rambam says you're not allowed to erase it. There is some issues here with the text of the Rambam and different versions in the Rambam. The Aruch HaShulchan says something very interesting. Aruch HaShulchan Yeridea, I think Kufnun Vav, Rabbi Michal Epstein was one of the greatest rabbis of the 19th century, the Rav of Navardik in Lithuania. So Rabbi Michal Epstein, Aruch HaShulchan, writes that when the Rambam says Kasav Aleph Lamed Me'elikim Yud Kei Me'havaya, he actually means if you write it out completely. If you write Aleph and Lamed from Elikim, like you read Aleph Lamed Fei and then Lamed Mem Dalid, or the full Yud and the full Hey, the Rambam holds you not allowed to erase it, which explains why the Ravid argues with the Rambam here, because it seems like the Ravid agrees with the Rambam, but he says he argues. So the Aruch HaShulchan says because the Rambam is Mechadish this word, and the Ravid says that's not the case. Only if you write Aleph Lamed are you not allowed to erase it, or Yud Hey, you're not allowed to erase it. Halacha Hey, Shar HaKinuyim. the other expressions with which we praise Hashem. Kegoin, for example, Chanun, V'rachum, Hagadol, Hagibber, V'hanoira, Haneman, Kana, V'chazek, V'kayetze behen, Hareim, Kishad, Divrei HaKadosh, Mutal Machakam. Throughout the Tanakh and throughout Chazal, we have different expressions which we describe Hashem through. For example, He's gracious, compassionate, great, mighty, awesome, loyal, zealous, powerful, etc. He says these are like the other Divrei HaKodesh, sacred words, and you're allowed to erase them. Rambam says it's not a problem to erase this name Chanun V'rachum. It's only the Shiva Shemas, the 7 names that he enumerated before, which are not erased. It's interesting that in the 7 names he did not mention the name Yud Kei, even though later in Allah Chadal he did mention the name Yud Kei. And I saw one of the commentators said, because the Gemara says on the pasuk in Parshas Beshalach, Ki Yod al Kes Yud Kei Melchama Hashem Ba'Amalek Midar Ein Hashem Shalom Ve'Ein HaKesir Shalom Ad Sheyimach Shmei Shel Amalek. Hashem's name is incomplete until Amalek's name is not erased. It doesn't allow the Yud Kei to be synthesized with the Vav Kei and make it a complete name. So therefore the Yud Kei is considered a different category because it's considered Ein Hashem Shalom. Nonetheless, it is part of the Shem HaMeforish, and it is considered nonetheless Hashem's name, even though it's incomplete, and therefore you're not allowed to erase the Yud and the Hey. I know some texts say here, Areim Kishar Sifrei HaKadosh. I'm quoting the manuscript of Oxford and Berlin of the Rambam, where it says Areim Kishar Divrei HaKadosh, not Kisvei HaKadosh, because this creates a real situation here, because the Rambam says it's like the other holy writings which you're allowed to destroy, you're allowed to erase, and that would seem to contradict what he's going to say in Halacha Ches. But if it says Areim Kishar Divrei HaKadosh, it means it's like other holy words that were not written as part of a Tanakh or a Sefer Torah, which the Rambam holds, apparently you're allowed to erase. Vav. Kli shahayashem kosovola. Fascinating Allah. If you have a vessel, and the name of Hashem was written on the vessel. Somebody wanted to give you a beautiful gift, so they gave you a kvar to wash your hands, and they write Hashem's name, right? So you should be able to know the bracha that you write, that you say when you wash your hands. So they have Hashem's name written on the keli. You have to cut out the place of Hashem's name, and you have to conceal it. You have to hide it out of a sign of respect. You can't even benefit from that part where Hashem's name is written. In other words, it's not just you kaitzetz, you cut it out. What do you care if it's there? You're not going to erase it. But actually, the Rambam is teaching you, forget about destroying it. I can't even benefit from the part of the keli where Hashem's name is on it. Use it for my personal benefit. And even if the name of Hashem was engraved in a metal vessel or in a glass vessel, and the person melts down the vessel, this is considered destroying Hashem's name, because you actively destroyed Hashem's name. When you melt down a vessel, hittich, you destroyed Hashem's name, and therefore there could be the penalty of lashes. And here there's a big chiddush, because this name is not written on a manuscript, it's not written in a Sefer Torah, it's just a name written on a keli, it's not the place for it. The Rambam says, no, this is holy, I'm not allowed to melt down the vessel. So what do? You cut out the place, and you hide it. What happens if somebody writes Hashem's name on his flesh? He writes it on his flesh. Can you imagine? He writes, what do you do now? The person should not wash this place or smear it with oil, because basically what you're doing is you're erasing Hashem's name. Nor can you stand in a place of excrement, because it's disrespectful to the holiness of Hashem that's manifested in the name that's written on my flesh. Fascinating halacha. What a person has to go to the mikveh, and it's a mitzvah to go to the mikveh. Then he wraps some reeds around it, and he goes into the mikveh. If he has no reeds, he wraps it around with a cloak, with something from one of his garments. Don't make it too tight, because you don't want to make a chatzitza, partition between your flesh and the water of the mikveh, since this is a mikveh, which is a mitzvah. But then you have a problem. If you're not going to make it tight, then the water is going to penetrate and erase the name. Says the Rambam, the reason they wanted you to wrap something around the name is only for one reason, because you're not allowed to stand in front of Hashem when you're naked. And when there's a name of Hashem on my flesh, and I'm going down to the mikveh, I'm basically present in front of Hashem, or Hashem's energy, Hashem's holiness, Hashem. He says, B'fnei Hashem, when I'm naked. So therefore I wrap it around and I conceal it. So therefore I don't mind if there's still a little space. It shouldn't be so it shouldn't be so tight because I need the water to go in. When the water goes in, it's going to get erased. And the Rambam said you're not allowed to wash it off and you're not allowed to smear oil on it. What's the difference? The difference is when I smear oil on it or I wash it off, let's say I take a washcloth and I scrub it off, I take soap and I scrub it off, or with my hand I take water and I rub it off, then I am directly destroying it. The pasuk that the Rambam quoted in Halacha Aleph was Lo sasun kein Lashem Elokeichem. You're not allowed to do it. But when I'm going to the mikveh, I'm trying to do a mitzvah, and because the water gets into it, it gets erased, that I am not liable for. I'm not liable for. This is not a direct act of erasing it. This is called a grama. It's a davar she'enim eskaven. My intention is not to erase Hashem's name. My intention was to go to the mikveh. It's possible it's going to get erased. This is called davar she'enim eskaven, which is not psikresh. It's not inevitable, and I didn't have intention, and I'm not doing it directly, of course. I'm doing something else, and therefore it is fine to do. Why do you then have to cover it? Not because you don't want to erase it, because you're allowed to allow the water to erase it, only because you're not allowed to stand in front of Hashem without clothes when you're naked. Halacha Zayin. If somebody destroys even one rock in a way of destruction, meaning, what does it mean, a way of destruction? Not for the sake of renovation. I'm not trying to repair. I am trying to destroy even one rock from the Mizbeach, from the altar, or from the Heichel, from the sanctuary, or from the Shar HaZara, the other parts, sections of the courtyards of the Beis HaMikdash. This is a biblical prohibition with the potential for lashes. Shenemar Bavai Diskei, the pasuk says, by idolatry, v'nitatztem es mizbechaisam. You should destroy their altars. V'kasum, and the pasuk continues, Lo sasun kein Lashem Elokeichem. Don't do this to Hashem. Destroy the altars, the sanctuary of Hashem. If somebody burns the wood, the beams of hekdesh, of the sanctuary, in order to destroy it, again, there's a penalty of lashes. The pasuk says, the trees of idolatry you should burn in fire. But don't do this to Hashem, your God, and therefore we have here another prohibition. Till now we spoke about destroying Hashem's names. Now we're talking about destroying a part of the Mizbeach, the Heichel, the Azara, the beams and wood of Hekdesh. This is all biblically prohibited. Halacha Ches, Kisvei HaKodesh Kulam. All of the sacred writings, which refers usually to the writings of Tanakh that are transcribed on parchment, upirushehem, and their commentaries, ubiureim, and their explanations, asur l'sarfam ela abdam biyad. You're not allowed to burn them or destroy them with your hands. In other words, to directly destroy it by burning it or with your hands is prohibited. V'ama abdam biyad, and if somebody does that, makin oisai makas mardus. Again, he receives the rebelliousness, the lashes of rebelliousness, which is the idea that the rabbis, the court, determines what is the appropriate penalty. We're not talking about holy writings that have Hashem's name. If it has Hashem's name and you burn it and you destroy it, we already spoke that that's a biblical prohibition. Here we're talking about the holy writings of the Tanakh, but it's verses or explanations that don't have Hashem's name. And this includes their commentaries and their explanations. Fascinating. When is this said? If it was holy writings that were written by a Jew in holiness, the Jew wrote it with a consciousness, with a sense of kedusha. But what happens if you have an apikoros Yisrael, meaning a Jewish heretic, a Jew who doesn't believe that the Torah is divine, the Torah is from heaven, and he writes a Sefer Torah. He writes Kisveka, he writes a whole Sefer Torah from Bereshis till the end. What's the halacha? Sarfin oisai im haskares shabai. You burn it together with the names of Hashem inside of it. What do you mean? Because this person does not believe in the holiness of Hashem, and therefore he did not write it for the sake of Hashem. In his mind, it's just regular literature. You have Shakespearean plays, and you have biblical texts. And therefore, because in his mind it is only literature, So therefore, v'hoyil v'daitoi kain, since this is his mindset when he's writing these words, even Hashem's name, Kadesh Hashem, the name never became sanctified, because for this person, it's just literature. And therefore, there's no prohibition of destroying it. On the contrary, mitzvah l'sarfai. Why would it be a mitzvah to burn it? Just say, you could burn it. He says, no, in order not to leave over a name for the heretics or their actions. Fascinating. This is all somebody who's a Jew and he's a heretic, he doesn't believe. A Gentile, he wrote Hashem's name, then you hide it. Or if you have the holy writings which are just decomposed, they rotted after a while, or a Gentile wrote them, not Hashem's name, just Kisri HaKodesh, holy writings. Here again, the halacha is Yiganezu, they should be hidden. Halacha tes. Kol Hashemus Ha'amurim Ba'Avram Kodesh. All of the names that are said in the story of Avraham, in Bereshis, in Parshas Vayera, are all holy. In other words, they refer to Hashem. Av zeh shenemar Adonai imna matzasi chein al nasava ma'al avdecha hareyu kodesh. It's a fascinating halacha. In the beginning of Parshas Vayera, 3 guests come to visit Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu turns to the guests and he says, it says, Vayomer, Avram Avinu refers to Aleph Daled Nun Yud, please don't go away from your servant. Who is this Aleph Daled Nun Yud referring to? On one level, you could say he's referring to the 3 guests. He calls them my master, speaking to the one who is the most senior one of them, my master, please don't leave. If that's the case, if I write that word, Aleph Daled Nun Yud, you can erase it, because it's not Hashem's name. It's just my master. It's a human master, the people who are visiting, or the angels who are visiting Avram Avinu. Says the Rambam, that's not the case. The Aleph Daled Nun Yud here is referring to Hashem, and therefore Hareyu Kodesh, and therefore it's sacred. Unlike the opinion, this is a discussion in Maseches Shvuos Daf Lamed Hey. Is this Aleph Daled Nun Yud referring to the angels or referring to Hashem? The halach is referring to Hashem. And of course, the consequences are enormous. Not only if you're allowed to erase it, but if something so significant. If Hashem was telling the angels, please don't, if Avram Avinu was telling the angels, please don't leave, okay. He was telling the guests, please, I want to be your host, accept my invitation and allow me to graciously offer you my hospitality. If he was telling this to Hashem, it means he was telling Hashem, please, I have guests. Wait up until I finish with the guests. He's telling Hashem, who came to visit him, Hashem, wait up till I finish, which is, of course, from where our sages derive, that welcoming guests is greater than welcoming the Shechina. So Avram Avinu tells Hashem, Aleph Daled Nun Yud, Al Nasavra Ma'al Avdecha, please stay here. Because the welcoming of the guest, in a way, is deeper than Kabbalas Pnei Hashchina. Hashem is Hamurim Beloit. Kol Hashem is all the names of Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Later in the parsha, when Loit meets his guest, and he also uses this word, it's all chayil, it's mundane. Chutz mizeh, besides one, Vayomer Loit Aleim Al Na Aleph Daled Nun Yud Al Na Adonai Hi Na Matzasi Avdecha Chen Lachis Es Nafshi. At the end of the story, when Loit is being escorted out of Zdoim, which is about to be destroyed, he says, please, my master, you have allowed me, you have given me the grace and given me life. Here, this one is referring to Hashem, as the Gemara says, Mishayesh biyadei lahamis al-achia is the one who can give somebody life or death. This Aleph Daled Nun Yud is already a name of Hashem. Kol Hashem es hamurim begivas binyamin. All of the names of Hashem related in the story of Givas Binyamin. Now remember, the Rambam writes in the introduction that this sefer follows the Tanakh, Mishneh Torah. In other words, he assumes that you know the whole Tanakh before you started to learn Mishneh Torah. All the names of Hashem in Givas Binyamin. The story of Givas Binyamin is the story of the mound of Binyamin at the end of the book of Judges. This is the famous, horrific story known as Pilegesh Begiva, when a Jewish woman was left to die, and not just left to die, she was murdered horrifically, and the Jewish people came to war against the tribe of Binyamin, who became accomplices to the murderers and would not give them up to be tried according to justice. And the Jews went to a war against Binyamin, and they were defeated horribly until they ultimately became victorious. And you might think they were maybe turning not to the real God, maybe to some deity. So that's why the Rambam says, no, all the names of that parsha in Shoftim are kodesh, they're sacred, you're not allowed to erase it. Kol Hashem es hamurim b'micha. All of the names of Hashem in the story of Micha, Judges chapter 17 and 18. Micha was a grandson of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he was a servant for the Pesel. Micha was a servant for an idol. Over there, all the names of Hashem are mundane. They are not sacred. Kol Hashem es hamurim b'navos kodesh. All the names that are related in the story of Navos in Malachim Aleph chapter 21 are kodesh. That's, of course, the story where the king Achav wants to abduct a vineyard of his relative Navos, and his wife, the wicked Izebel, hires false witnesses and pays them to testify that what? That he cursed Hashem. Over there, the names of Hashem are kodesh. It's referring to God, and that's why he was punished by the false testimony of the witness, which allowed Achav to get his vineyard. And that's when Eliyahu Hanavi said, Haratzachta v'gam yarashta. We will not allow you to murder and then inherit Nevais as well. Kol Shloima b'shir Hashirim kodesh. Every time the name Shloima is mentioned in the Song of Songs, it's sacred. It's really representing the name of Hashem. Vareyu kashar hakinuyim. It's like the other kinuyim. The other kinuyim are the other names by which we express Hashem's name. They are like the other kinuyim, the other expressions of Hashem, even though it's not one of the 7 names that are not erasable. Chutz mizeh besides, ha'elef lecha shloimeh at the end of Shir Hashirim. Kol malchaya amur b'Daniel chayil. Every time it says malchaya, king, in the book of Daniel, it's mundane, it's not referring to Hashem. Chutz mizeh ant malka melech malchaya. In chapter 2 of Daniel, Varehu Kishar HaKinuyim, this too is like one of the, not nicknames, but one of the kinuyim, one of the expressions by which we express ourselves to convey Hashem's presence, even though it's not one of the names, the Shiva Shemes She'enam Nimchakin. This concludes the 6th chapter of Rambam Hilchos Yesodei Hatorah. I do want to point out one fundamental point here. Someone asked, why does this fit into Yesodei Hatorah? Hilchos Yesodei Hatorah literally means the fundamentals of Torah, the fundamentals of halacha. And we have seen the pattern of the Rambam. The first chapter was about God's presence. The second chapter was about God's knowledge and the worlds that Hashem created and the unity of Hashem and the malachim, the 10 levels of malachim that exist. And Perek Gimel discussed the story of our cosmos, just like Perek Gimel and Daled, Ma'aseh Merkava, Ma'aseh Bereshis. And this is all to know something about Hashem and know His creation and reach love, to reach a state of love and awe. And then the next chapter, chapter 5, is the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying Hashem's name, that which we're allowed to do, we're not allowed to do, that which we have to die for, that which we have to live for. And finally, at the end of Perek Hey, how through daily conduct a Jew can create, God forbid, a Chilul Hashem or a Kiddush Hashem. Later, the Rambam is going to get into prophecy and to Torah from heaven. That's going to be the subsequent chapters. Very, very fascinating. A mamash fundamental to Yiddishkeit, something they should be learning in every single yeshiva. But Perek Vav seems like isolated halacha. You know, Hashem's name is written on a keli, and I'm not allowed to melt the keli. Hashem's name is written on the blackboard or on a piece of paper, and I'm not allowed to erase it. This the Rambam puts in right here in Hilchos Yesodei Hatorah. But perhaps the Rambam is here saying something very powerful, and you could deduce it from one line in the Rambam, and that is, he says, when you have your name written on your flesh, you're not allowed to go to the mikveh without concealing, wrapping some reed or a cloak around the name, because you're not allowed to stand in front of Hashem when you're naked. What do you mean you're not allowed to stand in front of Hashem? He's standing in front of Hashem. I mean, Hashem is everywhere, but nonetheless, a person is allowed to go to the mikveh. What do we see here from the Rambam? The Rambam is telling us something very powerful. Hashem is infinite. Hashem is undefined. We cannot define His reality, as the Rambam told us numerous times. And yet, Hashem gave us certain names that capture, or so to speak, convey, or are conduits for divine sanctity, for Kedushas Hashem, for the presence of Hashem in a uniquely manifested and conspicuous way. It's not just a certain consciousness or awareness. Even the physical ink transcribed on a piece of parchment or a piece of paper or the person's flesh, or engraved in a vessel, those physical shapes and letters become a real manifestation of Hashem's Kedusha in the physical world. And therefore, a person, when he erases them, or she erases them, or destroys them, you're not destroying letters. Who cares if you destroy letters? What's the big deal? We're always erasing letters. No, this is really, it's like a stab at the reality of divinity, which is, of course, a fundamental idea in Hilchos Yesodei Hatorah, that Hashem, in all of his absolute, undefined infinity, being omniscient and being omnipresent and transcending matter and space and time, nonetheless chose and gave an opportunity for his presence, for his infinite reality to be manifested, to become expressed and revealed to some degree in the very physical world, in the physical reality, in the name that we have, the name that we use to define Hashem, the Shiva Shemesh She'ein Nimchaken, those actually are sacred. Which is, of course, one of the essential ideas of halacha. Halacha is the blueprint that Hashem gave through which we live our lives and we repair the world to become a place that is a manifestation of the divine reality. L'saken olam b'malchus shin daled yud. It becomes the canvas, if you wish, upon which we draw and we introduce the radiance, the truth, the wisdom, the authenticity of the core of reality, which is divine. And that's why the Rambam begins the Perek, Kol ha'ma'abed shem min hashemes hakdoshim hatahorim shenikra b'hem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If somebody destroys the name of the holy and pure names with which Hashem is called, because these are the names with which Hashem is called, these names are holy and pure, and even their physical manifestation has that Kedusha and Tara. It's not just the name alludes to something transcendent to give the person, a mnemonic, a siman. I see Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. I remember there's something called transcendent. No, it actually relates to the letters themselves. When I destroy one of those names with which Hashem is called, it really, it perforates the world. It destroys something in the world. It takes a stab at the Kedusha, at the Kedusha of the world, at the truth, at the true reality of the person and the true reality of the whole universe. This concludes the 6th chapter of Hilchos Yesodei Hatorah.